Hey there everybody, it's Nathan Cool with NathanCoolPhoto.com, and this is part 2 in the multi-part series on editing artistic portraits. Now, if you recall from the last video, I've got this shot of Khalid Shields, fitness model. We're doing some large prints, and so we wanted to be able to get the right composition, so I showed how to do that by getting that composed with using some content-aware scale. Now that we've got that, we were just shooting against some savage gray backdrop, we still have a ways to go until we get to the final product, which is going to be eventually this. So right now we have to take that picture and add some textures to it, and then later on we're going to start adding some other special effects to it, which none of this is all that complicated. It's all done in Photoshop, but I want to take you through it step by step. So right now let's go forward and add some textures to this particular portrait before we start adding some of the special effects. Ready to see how this is done? Let's get started. So just to recap real quickly, here's the shot of Khalid, and it's been cropped to an 8:10 type of cropping, that aspect ratio. We started out though with something that was like this, and then of course we used a content-aware scale. Now we've got this. So this is the composition that we wanted, and for all the reasons we do this to get the highest definition possible for the advertisement that this might go into, then that's why we've got this shot with that type of composition and then added later. But we still have the special effects to add, but first thing is adding some textures. So this was just shot up against a savage gray backdrop. The light is very close, as shown in that video earlier on shooting one light dramatic portraits. But what we can do is lighten it a little bit and also add a little bit of feel to it by adding just a standard texture. So some of the textures that I've found these over the years. Very simple. This is just some canvas, a used piece of stuff, really not all that fantastic, but when you use it as a texture, you can make this really pop. So I'm just selected all this with Control A. I'm going to copy it with Control C. I'm going to go back over here and now add that by doing a Control V. Now, it's very small, but bear in mind this is a TIFF file and we're going to do some stuff with it. First thing is, let's go ahead and stretch that out so it covers the entire area. And we can overlap that. In fact, you don't want all that like little bit vignette at the top. That's fine. Now, the next thing for this is to add this as a blending mode of soft light. Now that texture's in there, if we zoom in, we can see that's starting to add a feel to it. But there's two things that are going on here. Let's zoom in at 100% and see. You can see right now that that texture is adding, it looks like some type of canvas print. We don't want that. We only want the color and the effects and that off that texture. So the first thing is we want to blur that. So it's very simple. Just go to your filters and then go down to blur. And then I like to use for this a Gaussian blur. And usually at about 15 works good for the radius, depending on what you do. If we only had a radius of 5, you can see still some pattern. So right about 15 seems to work real well for most of what I want to do. And then you can just click OK. Now we don't have any of that pattern. The one thing this has done though is it's also adding the color from that canvas. If I turn it on and off, you can see it's adding that color. So there's a lot of ways to go about getting rid of that. I'm just going to go ahead and desaturate it. Now, you can desaturate some of it or all of it. If you desaturate all of it, then all you would do is go to Image and then Adjustments, and you would go then to Desaturate. And that would get rid of all the saturation and just maintains the light. If you want to desaturate just some of it, let's back out of that and let's add an adjustment layer. So let's go to Layer, Adjustment Layer, Hue Saturation Layer, and we'll call this Desatu, and then for Texture, just so we can keep track of it. You can name it whatever you'd like. I'm going to add a clipping mask to it by clicking this little guy here. And what he does is make sure that he's only going to affect then the first visible layer below, which is our texture layer. So now I'm going to just desaturate that to the level I feel comfortable with. So let's say we want to desaturate it that much. So we still have a little bit of color in there. And if you still think that's too much, then what you can do is put a layer mask, which it already has on this saturation layer. You could grab an eraser tool and then erase the bits out of it that you don't want. So you can do that just like you'd work off of any other mask. So that's fine there. Doing that, you might say, okay, well, let's up that a little bit more since we erased some of that off of the subject here, off Khalid on this. So we can add a little bit more, erase it, brush on what we need to till we get it all in there. If we had it all in there, it would look like this with some of that erased then. So anyways, that adds that particular texture. So that's good, and that adds some light, and it adds a little bit of oomph to the background. So without that layer, the background's a little bit darker. It's also just doesn't have much texture. It's very plain. But we want to add even more texture to it. So what I like to do at this point is I've got some, if I want to make it look really rough, so we want to make this look kind of rapper-ish style. And so what we want to do, and it's funny probably hearing an old guy like me talk about that, but I'm going to find some old stuff here. This is just a piece of rusty stuff. It was a picture taken of some type of flaky paint coming off of it. I'm going to take this and I'm going to do the same technique where I'm going to copy that by selecting it all and do just a Control-A, Control-C. Go up here and just Control-V and paste that in. Now, I want to turn that, so I can just go to Edit, and then to, I'm going to do a Transform, and I'm going to rotate that, let's say, 90 degrees clockwise. Yeah, I don't like that. We'll go do this. We'll keep playing around with that, maybe flip it vertically. That probably is pretty good for what we want, because I'm going to show you why. Let's go ahead and, just like we did before, scale that out. So we're going to just go to Edit, Transform, and then Scale, just like we would any type of any transformation. And just like we did before in the other texture layer, we'll bring this out. Now for here, I can also once again put an adjustment layer on it to desaturate some of it, but I'm going to desaturate the whole thing just for this case. So Image, Adjustment, and then Desaturate. Turn that into a blending mode of soft light, and now we've got some texture. But what we've got when we zoom in here is we can see that there's too much on the model, too much on Clique. Now, some of this is kind of neat. If you wanted to have an effect of a fresco painting flaking off, you could take bits of this or some other type of peeling stuff, and you could overlay it on the subject, but that's not what we're after in this particular picture. What we want to do is just get it rid of off the subject. So to do that, I'm going to go down to, I'm going to add a layer mask, so we'll just go to Layer Mask, Reveal All. I'm going to go down to the layer that has Clique. I'm going to grab the Quick Selection tool, and I'm going to make sure that it doesn't have Sample All Layers on, so up here. So that's not checked, so all I'm doing is sampling him, and I'm dragging around, just grabbing him real quick. It doesn't have to be extremely accurate because this is just a texture and it doesn't really matter. It's not a complete picture that we're trying to cut out. So we'll get some around the hair, but we can brush that out. I'll show you that in a second. So now all we do is just go back up here to the layer mask on that particular rusty, flaky looking texture, and we're just going to hit the delete key and that gets rid of it. Now if I wanted to go ahead and add some more in, I could erase even a little bit more of it. What's even best is if I just change the opacity of that layer just a tad. So that kind of brings some of that out. I could have also feathered some of this in on Clique. I could also brush in a little bit with a low flow brush to have some of that just kind of overlapping on him a little bit if I want to. So I get a little bit of a rough look on him. But it's all to your heart's content what you'd like to have in there. So you can brush, erase, and whatever you want to do. Could have also, when I selected Clique, I could have also then done a little bit of feathering around him that might also help clean up some of that edge. Or, since we're just using this as just a texture, I can just go ahead and erase some of him around some of those brighter areas, and that can usually do it. Same thing for the hair. Remember, we didn't select all the hair, but since it's in soft light mode, a lot of that won't show up. So anyways, that's what we have. So let's revisit where we were. So we were at this phase in our last video, and this is where we took the picture of Clique, and it was shot so that we have a real high def picture, but then we cropped it and then used a content aware scale to get it to this size. And then through this video, we've added in a texture, we've made sure that we've erased part of it and desaturated it also across the subject and the rest of the picture. And then we added in this funky looking background. Now this is completely optional, but this makes it look like we were shooting up against some abandoned building or something. So anyways, that's the next phase to it. And then the next phase, we're going to even pump this up even more. So at this phase, you can probably see why I was using the Savage Gray backdrop. If I used a completely white backdrop, I wouldn't get the same type of blending that I get when I'm using soft light in this type of using textures in this type of blending mode. So I really love using the Savage Gray backdrop for that. It's enough of a neutral color to give me the effects that I want. And you're gonna see that more in the next tutorial as well. Because what we're gonna do, we're really gonna start pumping it up. And this is, we're gonna start adding in some lighting effects to really make this artistic portrait pop. Anyways, I hope you liked this video and that you're starting to get through this from the last one and also from how to shoot the dramatic portraits. Part 3 is gonna be coming up. Just make sure you stay tuned for that. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It won't cost anything, and as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks a lot for watching. Stay tuned for part 3, and until next time, take care, be safe, and get out there and shoot something.